So hi everybody, welcome to the Astrology Squad. We haven't been with you for a while, but we decided to come back together, particularly for Baby Reindeer, which is the Netflix series everybody's been talking about for the past couple of months. And we're going to give an astrological insight into it, plus also an insight into the birth charts of the two allegedly real people behind this allegedly real story as well. But before we do that, always delighted to welcome my co-host, Richard Swatton. Richard has been an astrologer for a number of decades, about 40 years, I think. I'm always privileged that he's alongside me, teaching at the London School of Astrology. And Richard has his own YouTube channel as well, Richard Swatton. So do check that out. Richard's videos on political events, on different uh, uh, criminal cases as well are also on YouTube. His insights, his psychological insights into astrology, have got him a lot of followers and a lot of interest in his work. So hi, Richard. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to see you.
And also, Richard hasn't seen the series. So Stephanie and I were talking in the last few days about that being quite a good thing in some ways.
Hmm.
Richard will give his insight into the signs, into the charts that we're looking at, and will, without really an understanding of what's going on, I'm sure he'll watch it at a later stage.
Well,
Um,
that's the whole thing about the astrology too, is that when a client comes to you, you don't know the actual particulars of clothing, the personality form, the ways of expression that the bare bones of the astrology chart is being expressed through an individual life. So that's all part of the astrological course. And then, of course, the person comes along and it's found that they do wear these things in their personality or whatever it is. So it seems like a good experiment just to go in raw, as it were, with me, and then how, to a certain extent, the blends of energy come out in characters or plot lines or whatever it is. And I really have no idea what the reference to Baby Reindeer is at all.
We'll tell you about that along the way, I'm sure. Also, I'm delighted to welcome Stefanie, who was with us last year on our last astrology squad. Stefanie James is an astrologer who's got her own podcast, Stellium Astrology Podcast, and also stelliumastrology.com. Has written about Netflix recently as well, and the astrology of Netflix. So do check out her website for that article. And again, joins me every now and then to teach or present or to help with the LSA. So it's great to have you here as well, Stefanie.
Thank you, Frank. I'm glad that you're not sick of me yet. I won't leave you alone.
And so, yes, let's take a look. What we've got in front of us at the moment is the chart for Baby Reindeer's release in the UK. At that time, we gather it was the 11th of April. I said it for London, but we're just looking at really the chart for this moment. And I gather it was released around 8 a.m. Automatically, as it gets released probably at midnight in California on Pacific time, 8 hours later. So it's I'm going on what Richard Gadd, who is the writer and star of the series, said as well. So what's interesting about the chart is that we've got it's just a couple of days after that eclipse, and it's a few days before the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction.
Mm.
And the Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions turn up at very interesting times, usually every 13, 14 years, and they tend to show the big fashions of the time, the things that get us excited, become they may be fashion trends, they might be music trends in particular, and this show of Baby Reindeer has become a massive phenomenon. So it's very interesting that it's being released or was released in April, just days before the Jupiter Uranus, and we'll see how that links to Richard Gadd's chart in a moment. And also Pluto's on the MC in Aquarius, and that's something that links to both of their charts that we'll see a little bit later. Is there anything either of you want to add about just a quick view of that chart before we get into the natal charts?
Well, one of the things I did actually do a short recording for my podcast on the show, and I kind of looked at the time period that the show was released under, and the sun is applying to square Pluto. It's early, but as time went by, the fascination with it grew, and it just felt very sun square Pluto, and then Venus caught up as well, and at that time it was very fitting for that kind of image. I think by that point, practically everybody had seen it, and it felt like there was very much a Venus Pluto sort of square energy. I happened to mention a few pointers from the show and how that fits into like Venus Pluto. And I had so many people contacting me with their stories. It was really, really interesting.
Right.
Mm.
Thank you. And Richard?
Well, I see Pluto on the MC. It used to be called the most elevated planet when a planet was on the MC, and it just brings in those Plutonic themes. That's what we're going to see. That's what it's going to trigger off in the public mind. Themes to do with power and loss of power. Themes to do with obsession, things taking over. Because Pluto is an outer planet, and those therefore represents something that we're forced to confront in some way. Not just death. He's the god of death, but those things in life which threaten to take us over, whether that's sexual obsession or whether that's being out of control. You and I did a Saturday together, and the theme of Terry Waite came up with that Pluto opposed Mars of his, and that he was taken as a hostage. These are large scale themes, but they can be internal compulsions, obsessions, sexual obsessions, power issues, death, all of the biggies, or it can be outer, as in political movements that take over an individual. So that's generally some of the themes I would think of if I was seeing a client. The other thing that came to mind very quickly was what Noel Tyl used to say about the progressed solar arc Jupiter coming to Uranus, and it just seemed to trigger off in my mind. He called it the big break. The big break. Now, those two phrases, those two words, obviously, big is Jupiter, and the break is Uranus. So it could mean that this is a big break for someone. It really makes people think in a different direction, or it leads them into a fresh understanding of life or something. And it may be even a big break for Mr. Gadd, or something of that nature. It's going to make big stars all of a sudden, probably about people. So
Indeed.
those are my first two comments.
Thank you.
I do have one other thing that I just think is interesting, just because I was looking at you've sent me an article, Frank, that I was reading, which is it going to be published in the TMA or something like that?
It's going to be published in the Astrological Journal.
Okay, so I'm not going to read it word for word, but you mentioned something in there about how people like to put something in a box that's good or bad, and they're not very comfortable with something that explores polarities and duality in a sense. And I think that that's interesting that there's a Sun-Mercury conjunction and that rising is Gemini at the time that this is released, because it really, really forces us to stretch to both ends of our mind to kind of process what's right, what's wrong, who is encouraging, who is rejecting, and and not just in the storyline with Martha and Donnie, but also with some of the other storylines that spiral off with Donnie as well. There's just such a huge amount of it's almost like, and maybe we're veering into the Mars Saturn conjunction here, but this kind of need for boundaries in some ways, this kind of assertiveness that seemed to lack throughout the whole thing, and watching somebody just allow events to kind of manipulate them and flow in some way. But yeah, there's no sort of right or wrong here. It just feels like everything's a bit of a big blur, and that Mercury Sun conjunction, it forces us to ask about looking at both perspectives, and toying with the idea that maybe both sides can be right at the same time or wrong at the same time. You know, there's not really it's a spectrum, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes. I think what you get from the beginning, I guess when we watch anything, we're trying to work out who the good guys are, who the bad guys are.
Mm,
What's so interesting, I think what's so fascinating about this show is that you do you do swap sides at different times, or at least you
yeah.
can see how they're both in some way addicted to the attention, addicted to each other in
Mm,
a way. And this may be seen by the Mars Saturn in Pisces there, but also perhaps the Pluto. And we know
mm,
when Pluto is strong in a chart, the journey often is from powerlessness to power
Yeah.
in
mm,
some way. And that power then can be used for good. It can be used to abuse or to subjugate others. There's always choice, obviously, in the chart. So the other thing as well, just generally as we're looking at this, I think the show is such a great reminder of the toxic nature of social media at the moment, as we'll see
mm,
what happens to both of them in real life as people expose who they are. And so Pluto and Aquarius, it's always when a big outer planet like Pluto moves into a new sign, watch the news, look at what we're being invited to understand during that time. And the Pluto and Aquarius themes can be seen in films and TV shows, things that become phenomenons like Baby Reindeer. Um, and I guess we're looking here at the psychological turmoil that happens to everyday people. And Aquarius is the sign of the everyday person, the person on the street, the person next door. And we're also looking at how social media can play such an important role in affecting people's mental illness or mental health issues, really. And now we're also seeing how the media and social media have exploited private people and exploited their troubles. And it becomes, we're all now obsessed with a show about obsession. So we're getting a lot of insight into what Pluto and Aquarius will be for us all. Neptune's journey through Pisces over the last 12, 13 years, I think, has been so much about the loss of individual privacy, data being sold off, AI on all sorts of platforms, knowing what we're going to buy and selling it to us. All of those things are the grander manipulation of Neptune in Pisces. And Pluto in Aquarius is perhaps talking about the harm that it's doing to people, to ordinary people. And this is a great example of that, not only in what the show shows, but also what the show has resulted in for the people involved in that. Yeah. Before we move on, do either of you want to add anything else?
Only
just
that.
that the 19th degree of Aries is supposed to be, is it Aries or is it Libra that's meant to be the interesting one, Frank?
In terms of the sun's elevation degree.
But also, doesn't it have another nickname? Something to do with the serial killer degree, or is that Libra? Am I
Oh,
getting confused?
that's yes, that thank you. That is 19 degrees Libra, isn't it? The
Ah, right, there we go. Yeah.
yes, yes, I've written about that a few times now. 19 areas as well. We've got the idea of the exaltation degree of the sun as well.
Mm,
And Chiron sitting there,
mm,
being exalted is the pain of the individual, the pain of being alone, the pain of that difficult dance of independence versus codependency, I guess, with the Aries and the Libra opposition as well.
mm, mhm,
the the fact that Pluto is on an angle, uh, well, it's on the MC, is a way of exposing, showing people. See, Pluto isn't always so visible. Um, but somehow with this Pluto on there, I think what you said, Frank, about giving us a hint about what's to come. You know, that the iPhones now are going to have AI in them. You know, they're almost going to take away the power of choice. They say you've got some choice, but I'm not so sure that that's the case. So Pluto in Aquarius is classic of what's wrong with technology, what's wrong with actually being able to connect into the total collective, which is what Aquarius is. Where does individuality end and collectivity begin? If your individuality is part of the collective, do you see? So that's all to do with this Aquarius. Aquarius always has a need to connect us to the group, to the larger cosmos, to a group identity. And Pluto in this sign is going to point out all of those things that can go wrong when you become classified as a member of a particular group, or that you seek adoration through group cohesion, because you're going to lose your identity.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, yes, I think that's one of the big painful lessons of Pluto at its most difficult. Thank you. So let's move on and have a look at the charts of the people involved. Now, I'm very blessed to have Caroline Gerard, who's my astrologer friend up in Edinburgh, who went and looked up the birth data of both Richard Gadd and Fiona Harvey, who is said to be the real life Martha. We'll talk about that in a moment. So we have time charts for both of them. These are equal house charts. Please use whichever house system speaks to you, of course. But with equal, the MC and the IC float. But all four angles are always exactly the same, whichever house system you look at. It's just that the houses and the wheel are divided differently depending on the house system. There's no right house system, no wrong one. It's just different ways of dividing the pizza. So we have Richard Gadd's chart. I've not included the data here, and I've not included the birth details of Fiona Harvey in there, simply because although Richard Gadd is now a public figure, Fiona is still very much a private person who is struggling with that. So it was my choice not to include the data. But you'll see the charts from birth certificate, from the timed details, and birthplace, birth time, birth date, all of that. So Richard Gadd is the writer of the show. He is also the star of the show, playing Donnie. Richard Gadd is in his 30s, but as Donnie, he's a struggling comedian. He's a bartender, wannabe comedian. There's a question mark over how much talent. Maybe that's part of the comedy of Baby Reindeer. Is that he's sort of quite spectacularly unfunny with his various performances up at the Edinburgh Festival, working in a pub and doing all of that. And it's very easy to feel sorry for him because he's obviously struggling, needing a level of attention, and it's hard work. So Donnie is based on him. And yes, before we say any more about the show itself, Stefanie, what's your feeling about the chart?
It's funny because when I was looking at this chart, I mean, I didn't have the time, so I looked at noon because that's what I lean towards. And so seeing that he had a Leo moon, it felt fitting because it felt like there were a lot of steps along the way where he could have made it a lot simpler and a lot less dramatic. But it seemed he thrived on that attention and the drama aspect of it all as it built up. It just felt like he really sort of lavished the attention in some way. It's a very strange, like we were saying before, like the kind of the duality aspect of it. It's like it's probably frightening, creepy, feel compassion towards the story to both people involved, but also this kind of awkwardness and this kind of disgust and discomfort. I toyed with the idea because I was like, I think possibly, because I didn't know his birth time, I was like, he might have Leo rising even, but I was like, it's possible he may also have Capricorn rising. I just felt like, he was so plugged in to this story, and his stellium that he's got rising in his chart. So he's got 15 Capricorn rising and Saturn at 13, Neptune at 12, and Uranus at 4, but just, slowly creeping up towards Neptune there. And that conjunction is sort of an imprint for a lot of people, or triple conjunction, is it? That stellium. A lot of people in that generation are going to have some sort of order, some combination of those planets. And then when something like this comes about, it kind of expresses an essence of what that can mean for a whole generation, if not, more for people, basically. And now that Pluto's moved out of Capricorn and shifted into Aquarius, it's a different expression. That kind of, we've shifted out of that corporate plutocracy kind of feel, and we're moving into that whole new expression, like you said. But that's connected to Uranus and Saturn anyway, with Pluto moving into Aquarius. So these planets are still very much, a mouthpiece for what's being expressed and how it's being expressed. And at first, when I was looking, I thought, well, it's just a general stellium because it doesn't really plug into anything personal. And then I realized it's right opposite his Mars and his Chiron as well in Cancer. And then I thought that this really could describe this need to have a very complex relationship with somebody who's going to embody either side of that opposition, whether it's like a kind of wounded, somebody who's passionate and requires care or wants to give care to in some way, or whether or not, it's somebody who desperately needs to find some way to assert their boundaries. You talking about his comedy routine, Frank, comedy can be quite an expression of it can be quite Saturnian sometimes, can't it? Didn't you've written about comedy, haven't you? You said that it's Saturn is often seen in good comedians because it's quite dry. But yeah, it was very, very awkward viewing, seeing him putting himself out there like that, and it almost felt like there was a like humiliation is part of it for him in some way. Now, another thing that I thought was really interesting about him was that he's got the Pluto at 13 Scorpio, which is very close to Pluto's perihelion degree, which is at 14. But Netflix also has got its Chiron at 14 degrees. I think I'm just looking down here. Yes, Netflix has Chiron at 14 degrees as well. So it means that at the time that they decided to officially name Netflix and the time that Richard Gadd was born, Pluto was at its closest point to the Earth. In fact, it had crossed the path of Neptune, so it was actually, it wasn't the furthest planet from the sun. So I feel like either it adds some intensity to Pluto in some way, we're feeling him in a closer way, or people that have this, Pluto at around 14 degrees of Scorpio, which is a lot of people, because this is a really slow moving planet. They have this need to really connect with Pluto or Pluto themes in some way, wherever it lands in their chart, and particularly if it picks up on one of their personal planets. It needs to be expressed, getting in touch with, some of the extremes that Pluto can provide. So I just thought it was interesting that he has really great synastry with Netflix. Anyway, just looking at their charts, and the fact that the Netflix is Chiron, which I think we talked about, or I wrote about in the TMA article, as sort of a need for binging. This kind of like obsessional need to keep consuming in some way, and his Pluto seems to land there. So it just felt quite appropriate actually that he would have that signature, or that it would just happen to feed in that way, and it would be quite elevated in his chart. And I also noticed that, just going back to the previous chart, that the Pluto at the moment is very close to Netflix's Venus as well. So I thought that was also interesting, that they're both benefiting from this in some way or another. But yeah, it feels like a very that stellium rising, it's everybody who has that kind of mixture of planets that from that time period, there is definitely a need to express themselves in a creative way if it's feeding into something, and it's very much a signature for like the digital transformation of humanity in some way. They've gone from what was before, where we didn't have much in the way of smartphones, or Netflix or anything like that, to suddenly being launched into this whole new way of being. And anybody carrying that as close to their ascendant or to one of their personal planets, they're usually very adept at working with these kind of energies in some way. But like, we haven't even got onto the fact that he's got his sun at 20 Taurus, which was very close to where that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction just recently happened. So perhaps I'll take a step back and let somebody else say something for a little while.
Well, just to add that the Saturn Neptune feels like he's carrying the weight, the burden. He's bringing to public consciousness right now the whole issue of victimhood, victimization, feeling victimized, perhaps being the persecutor too. All of this is deeply personal because it's opposing that Mars
Yeah.
Cancer and the Chiron and on his ascendant. So, in some way, he's carrying that. We become, I think, a very victim-driven society where, who do we blame? Or let's not look at ourselves and our responsibility, but let's instead blame the people that trigger us. And I think with that Saturn Neptune, he is carrying the weight. He's actually uh, you know, part of our journey of looking at how um, Neptune is about blurred lines, and the blurred lines of boundaries. Saturn Neptune. That's one of the key things that the show talks about. How he encourages his stalker, his abuser. He's involved. He
Yeah.
loves the attention. It's a symbiotic situation. It's an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn Neptune is a key to that as well. Richard, do you have having again not looked at the show yet? Anything out of this chart that you'd like to explore?
Um, I'd like to go back to this conjunction that Stefanie was talking about. When you get Neptune, you've got a part of the personality which doesn't want to be embodied. And when it's in Capricorn, there's this sense that it needs to be earthed in some way. So the question arises, how are you going to earth your imagination? How are you going to earth your ideal fantasies? Because Neptune seeks to go beyond the body and to be absorbed into something very much larger, either a kind of victimhood, if you like, overcome with something. So when you get Saturn, Neptune, you have a conflict in you, how to embody reality, but how to get out of it at the same time. And this arose, I think, at a time when the new age was coming forward, where there were lots of new knowledge, lots of yoga. Jung was being reprinted. This conjunction of Uranus and Neptune, it almost commercialized Capricorn. The new age, these new age theories, crystal technology, yoga, or even mindfulness started to come in, I think, then. So you have a problem. Where do we go? Do we fulfill ourselves through some kind of vocation and ambition and get money and fortune, with for this Taurus Sun and this Saturn Capricorn, or do we go out into some kind of fantasy somewhere? And it's an inner conflict of what's real and what's not real. Then you oppose this with Mars. Well, Mars Saturn in all of the old astrology textbooks does not have a good press. It's often represented as some kind of sadomasochistic thing, that you're out of control and then you're in control. Mars likes to assert itself. Saturn likes to control. So here we have a strange psychological combination of wanting to lose your mind, lose your head into some kind of uh, fanatical obsession with Neptune, Mars, and then at the same time control that. So there's an odd combination, I think, psychologically, a conflict. Saturn is all about embodying things, making them real, and then Capricorn wanting to make money out of them. So we have this dodging about. Now, Uranus moving into this conjunction has to do with, I suppose, an individual part of your life which wants to break down all of the known structures. So this is a deep triple conjunction. And if you go to Uranus, you get outside of yourself. You go frenetic. Your mind is likely to go out of control in some way. This Mars Uranus is a very frenetic uh, energy, which leads to great anxiety. I mean, Mars in
Mm.
Cancer, what's it asserting for? It's asserting for a close rapport, close relationship. That's what it wants on a personal level. Then it opposes Neptune and says, well, the impossible, the ideal. Uranus won't let you sit down in one place. It immediately disturbs it. You try and control it, there's some kind of need for restraint here on your emotional life, but then it goes out anyway. So there's a lot of madness in this if a person doesn't have a strong ego. Mind you, go, Sun in Taurus like to have something upon which they depend, and the moon in Leo is looking for recognition in some way, whether that's through art or theatre or just a very close personal relationship. It seems to me that this triple conjunction doesn't sit well with these personal planets.
Thank you, Richard. That's
No.
really interesting. I think also what it does is really those oppositions from the 6th to the 12th around the descendant ascendant axis, plus the Sun Pluto opposition, really
Mm.
describes the turmoil that he invites in his life through kindness originally. That's what the show suggests at the beginning. He's very kind to Martha, who then takes that as an invitation to be closer to him. She comes into the bar over and over again and wants more from him. And that moon in Leo, as you say, in the seventh house, is attracted to attention from others. What he was receiving from her was what he wanted everybody else to find amusing, to find lovable, to be special in many ways. I think that's she incorporated that. We'll see how the connections between the two charts really show that. Yes, I love that description of that because the Mars Neptune, for instance, is so maybe uh, uh, trying to search or in some way trying to encapsulate what it means to be a man, which we also see in the series. He has um, a close situation with uh, a director friend who abuses that, who rapes him, who drugs him. He tries looking at transgender porn. He gets involved with a transgender woman. It's a really interesting search, the Mars Chiron opposite Neptune and opposite Uranus, and it's sporadic. He's breaking up. He's interested again. It's back and forth in that uh, classic oppositional situation, really. And the Sun Pluto has that feeling as well of I want solidarity. I want calm, says the Sun in Taurus. The opposition to Pluto invites drama, crisis, extremity from other people. Oppositions always reflect our relationship patterns, the things we need to resolve through projection and taking back as well.
Well,
Yeah.
the vocational core of the Sun requires depth. And in some point along the life, it requires a kind of turning over or a death of the personality that one's built with the Sun. And so you see, you descend into some mania, compulsion, problem, stalker, going to prison, anything that Pluto comes along and takes away. And it's that journey into unknown territory which is going to see a transformation or an annihilation of the individual self. You can't get away with it. Any stance Sun, Pluto, but particularly the opposition, has to confront the fact that they build up an identity and a personality, and eventually, through one means or another, they meet Pluto that takes them on a journey into the underworld, loses their personality, has to kind of die to something, and it can be very violent. I mean, the Sun is Eros, it's life. Saturn, Pluto is death. So one way or another, there is a call to depth, to being on the edge, as you said, to extremes. This is the person that likes going in those um, uh, uh, mountain pathways on a bike at 60 miles an hour,
Oh,
flinging
can't
around it.
watch that
You see,
stuff.
it's like, those world's dangerous roads,
Craziest
and they
people in
don't
the
want to
world.
they don't want to look out the left because a couple of inches they're going to their death. But it always
Oh,
the same at the end of it. I haven't done such a thing in all my life. That's woken me up because they're on an
mm,
edge. And Sun
mm,
Pluto people, however it's met, sexually, with a sense of experimenting with drugs or problems or going a bit crazy or ending up in a Mexican jail, whatever it is, the real pull underneath it is to bring life and death into an alignment. But it's only death
Mm.
that tells life its ultimate meaning. But without life itself, death is just a dark, dismal hole somewhere. Do you see what I mean? So that call is on the chart. Then we get Mars, Neptune. Mars is not going to be satisfied with just a close personal relationship as it would be in Cancer. It's injured in his phallic masculine identity, being conjunction to Chiron. It's opposed to Saturn. So he can't, he might have attempted to be in control or something, but really he just wants to go on drugs and be wild. And then if he's still existing at the end of that, a little bit of Uranian LSD as well. So we've got ecstasy, LSD, a lack of identification of maleness, and a pull towards extremity with the sun, Pluto. So if we had those together, I haven't seen the show, but I think after this I'm going to have to.
I think, Richard, just hearing you talk, the way that you're, describing this, it's amazing that you haven't seen it, because what
Yeah,
you're describing is perfect. Like, it feels as though when you're watching the show that he's having very much an ego breakdown. Like he's
yeah, yeah,
he's in the throes of like trying to work out who he is, because he's not attracted to women anymore. He's completely and utterly, through the experience he had with the director, it brought something new to him that actually, he actually questions in the show whether he would still have that preference had that not have happened.
right,
And it's like these experiences have forced him to develop into somebody he doesn't recognize, and there's a lot of just brutal honesty about himself. Like, it is very reflective, and there is some sort of crisis that he's. I think that's what's appealing about it for a lot of people. It's like literally witnessing, if it was happening to you yourself, it would be horrifying, or to somebody that you care
mm,
about. But to
mm,
watch it from a spectator perspective, basically, you are able to kind of analyze and understand what happens during a crisis where you really do lose yourself. And it's so Pluto. It's like it's like a rebirth process watching the whole thing, really. And I mean, you don't get to enjoy anything really satisfying about it. You just get to understand that he's finally being set free at some point, and you kind of relieved, because even though it's quite difficult to watch, you're actually like, finally he's just being himself, you know. So yeah, it's amazing that you haven't seen it and that you can come to these conclusions, because, and talking about the wounded masculinity as well, just wow. Amazing, on the money.
It's the journey with the outer planets is always a journey, ideally, to authenticity as well.
Mm,
And that Sun Pluto, uh, as Richard is saying, can only reach that through extremity, through
yes,
self-loathing as well, and through the idea of, we know with Pluto in relationships, it can be the highest connection, or it could be a feeling of debasement. It's got uh, that extremity once again.
mm.
If we move on and have a look at um, Martha's chart, the real life woman, Fiona Harvey. Um, Now, just as a bit of background, it took all of 5 minutes really for people to find Fiona Harvey and link her to Martha, who was played by an actress in the show. And it has turned her life upside down, of course, as you can imagine. She went on the Piers Morgan show to deny most of it, to say that she did name she did call him Baby Reindeer because he was sweet and he looked like a baby reindeer she had as a child. But in the show, they claim that she sent him 41,000 emails, 350 hours of voicemails, 744 tweets, 106 pages of letters. Um, the show says it's a true story, and one of the Netflix executives even went into Parliament and mentioned that it was a true story while he was talking about other issues as well. So she's come along, been outed as Martha, denies that she did most of that and said she barely knew him and he's really just used something about her to sell his story. So she's furious. She's now got legal representation to sue Netflix, to sue him. And one of the main things that appears not to be correct now is that in the show, she ends up uh, in a courtroom and with a criminal record again. And it's being proven apparently as I'm recording this just the last few days that she's never had a criminal record. So uh, the Netflix show were very uh, clear about saying that it's a true story rather than based on true events, which would have taken them legally, put them in a better position legally, of course. So anyway, she's come along. We found her birth details. They're fascinating how they link with Richard Gadd, which we'll see in the next slide. But I guess the question is this a chart of somebody that could send 41,000 emails since the interview with Piers Morgan? She was upset of how she was portrayed, of course. There was a lot of comment about that she wasn't well and shouldn't have been exploited, although it was her choice to come on and have her say. I think she probably sat there and felt she explained herself very well with her legal background and explaining that she really had very little to do with this character on the show. It doesn't really reflect her actions. And yet, as always, people have their own opinions, and she's come away, I guess, even more exposed, more violated. Anything you want to add about that, Stefanie, that I may have missed?
No, I literally just watched that Piers Morgan one because I don't know why I didn't watch it sooner. I just kind of I gave it a bit of a wide berth for a while. I think it's just because the whole series is just so hard going that I needed a bit of a break. But yes, I think it's interesting her side of the story because she denies a lot of it. And she's quite angry about it. She's calm, but she's assertive about it. Just looking at her Mars up there in Libra and thinking about the fact we were talking about the 19th degree being the serial killer degree. So it's close enough. But I'm not calling her a serial killer, just saying, interesting that we're dabbling with that kind of side of humanity there. But
I
yeah,
mean,
it's
it
I
reflects lawyer, doesn't it, in her Mars
yes,
in Libra in the
yes.
ninth house, that interest in
She
advocating, arguing.
she mentioned that employment law was her forte just when I was watching that interview. But yeah, interesting just looking at her transits. So she'd be having her Saturn return, I guess second Saturn return right now. She's got Pluto on her ascendant as well, which is challenging. More than challenging, I'd imagine, actually, because it's going to affect every aspect of her life. But yes, it's just what I found interesting about the interview was that there's, the bit where apparently she catches him staring through the window at her at one point because his phone goes off. And she denies that happened even. So there are aspects that he kind of incriminated himself by encouraging the behavior. And she said even that didn't happen. So she's denying a lot. And obviously, you don't know who to trust, but you can hear the lawyer in her when she speaks. She's very official and firm, and you can imagine her in the courtroom fighting cases, can't you? She's and that sun and moon conjunction there, born on that new moon. It's very commanding. She's quite commanding, I think, and very confident in her whole demeanor. I think she comes across that way. But yeah, it was really interesting that's fascinating to watch as well, the whole Piers Morgan interview. I actually felt like she kind of met her match. Like they're both really quite good at sort of tying each other up in sort of like entangling each other in their own words, if that makes sense.
Interesting, yes. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Richard, what do you make of the focus of Leo, Virgo, seventh, eighth house? Anything that strikes you about that?
Well, that she's going through her own Pluto transit of the ascendant,
Yeah.
or that we talked about losing an identity somehow shedding an old skin, coming to light, being, yes, so something where Pluto goes. You said it in your introduction, Frank. It's a story from innocence to breaking down of innocence. That's the story of Pluto. But we have a contradiction, as a lot of charts do. What does Sun in Leo, Moon in Leo, Mercury in Leo want? Wants to recognize themselves as individuals. And if they've been portrayed totally differently, then they're going to be up in arms about that, because this is not the real me. And yet we see it placed in the seventh house, indicating that most of her energies, her sun and moon, her emotional energies, her intellectual energies, and herself, her life force, is dedicated to the service of others in some way. She cannot see herself unless she's within a sphere, seventh house, of other people, whether that's in a courtroom or whether you see. So I get a feeling that this Pluto opposed to Sun, opposed to midpoint and so on, of the Sun Moon over these next few years, we'll see her change to transform her identity. She may even become a star or something of her own light, yes? But I think this is trying to help her define who she instinctively is. Yes, she's come into the limelight, which often Leo represents. As far as the character goes, it's very interesting, isn't it? Moon square Neptune. You know, that you get involved in a relationship and the boundaries of your individual needs and individual emotional warmth tends to get blended with another person. Yes, you tend to lose yourself. Now that can be wonderfully erotic, wonderfully kind of involved. Is this, if you said about victimization, Neptune isn't just victimization, it's a total immersion into something where you feel an ecstatic kind of being saved. Do you see? I'm saved from this world. So that's what's offered by the moon. But we don't live in a world like that. We have to come back to the hard facts of reality. So, anyway, I think this sun moon has probably got very annoyed indeed about being misrepresented for who she actually is. And here we got a classic example. She hasn't done this herself, but Pluto's moving. Some other force has come out of the world to force her to, if you like, yes, the phrase "give her side of the story." That's classic, isn't it? Sun in the seventh, not their story, but who are me amidst another person's story. That's often the sun seventh, moon seventh person, moon seventh. Bit of a contradiction in terms with energies. Self first, but at the same time, you only define yourself through it with others in some way.
Mm. Thank you, Richard. Anything you want to add, Stefanie?
That I think it looks like Richard's planets fall into her 12th, just thinking of his chart, and you know, that there's this kind of distortion, perhaps, you know, with how she sees him. Maybe there's that's a place where you can idealize somebody because you don't perhaps you know, see them in their true light in some way, or how they truly present themselves. And the other thing I think is interesting, just off the back of something Richard said about her sun and moon being in, you know, about being recognized by being in the presence of others. It reminds me of, it's just an interesting observation compared to, there was a line in the show where Donnie, the main character, was having an argument. I think the argument that may have ended it, I think he broke up with his girlfriend, the trans lady, and she was a psychotherapist, I think. And she said, you know, this woman basically epitomizes your messed up projections. So basically, she's basically saying you are the messed up person here, and you are just projecting. And in some strange way, it's almost as though her sun and moon in this chart, in her real chart, kind of almost reflects that in some way. It's like there's a projection element coming from her too. You know, like her identity has, like you said, has to be kind of confirmed for her by her presence in other people's lives. And yeah, very much other person orientated, you know.
Or when it's not reflected,
Mm,
then she knows it's not. And so she comes
yes.
towards her own self-definition by having a description of her which is inaccurate and invalid and so on. And that's going to bring the old pride into
Yes.
play. I mean, you know, that's one of the, well, let's say one of the elements
Yeah.
of Leo is pride, and pride, um, you know, can see us. It, to a Leo, if the pride is damaged, it's a damage to the self. It's a deterioration or a demolition of who one intrinsically is. So this is a big pain for her. How much is projection? How much is true? And that I don't know. But you know, film shows tend to point up things, but if they're saying this is true rather than based on true events, which is the how films often get out of it, right? I think that's a bit of a faux pas from that side as far as legally. And if I don't know if this lady is a she's in the court, is she? She knows how to argue her case. Moon is Mars in Libra, classic, fighting on behalf of others. Not so easy to fight on behalf of yourself.
But
Mm,
she's found her cause now with that Mars in Libra in the ninth, fighting against the injustice of how she was portrayed.
Yes.
And the Leo as well, you mentioned pride, which is the big thing with Leo. And I also think the other thing is that the portrayal has disrespected her. And respect is such a important area for Leo. They're not made fun of. She's become probably in her own eyes a laughing stock, even though and or misrepresented in many ways, even though I think people have nothing but compassion, hopefully, nothing but compassion for both of them and the dynamic. But probably, she says she hasn't watched it, and friends have told her about it. I'd find that very difficult with the sun, moon, and Leo,
mhm.
not to watch a depiction of yourself. You know,
Yeah.
I would find that exceptionally hard not to be curious about how they're representing you. So I imagine she's probably seen it by now. If we look at the biwheel, what's so fascinating is that so his chart is in the center with all the house cusps
Mm,
around the chart are his, and then her chart is in the outer wheel here. So we can see her ascendant here and descendant
mm.
align and her sun aligning with his moon in Leo. And that's one of the big connections here. So if we think about that dynamic, the Aquarius, the Leo, which of course, as we've said already, is being hit by Pluto, that's at 1 at 2 degrees Aquarius at the moment. It's really bringing them to prominence. It's bringing the darkness of their story to light. A very Pluto journey in that sense.
But
And
also, sorry, but also making it so public, so everyman, so everybody's talking about it. The individuals here could get lost. This is the
Mm,
danger of Pluto in, you know, the individual life writ large over the Netflix, over the entire world. If people want to see it, they can. So the individual story could get lost. And this is one of the annihilation aspects of being online, of being on social media, of have AI do everything for you and everything else. What input do you have? What value is the individual? And often you can only find that in a private life, not in a public life, because as soon as it's public, as James Hillman once said, he said, "We're all scandals." I like that. When he was asked the difference between, you know, what's the difference between a private life and a public life in the age, he said, well, we're all scandals. We've all got things that, but those are our personal scandals. So the Aquarius Leo is what's to you, what is public. And it's a very difficult thing because you can lose yourself, TikTok or this or that. And it's exploded people's fantasies if they're demoted or demolished but by somebody else's depiction of them. You know,
mm,
the pride system is a self-worth system. Yes, you value this, and then somebody says something, just a little thing that they got wrong, and the person feels, you know, really rageful, and and so on. Or if somebody else gets more publicity, they feel incredible envy and they want to take that person down. It's not an easy axis, that Leo Aquarius with Pluto in it. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. No, very true. And the journey of Leo is to allow other people to have their time in the sun as well. That journey of allowing, being a mentor and allowing other people to shine. But the unhappy Leo is the one that doesn't feel they've had enough yet. And so they begrudge anybody else having that moment. So when we think of Leo Aquarius, we think of the need for attention, the desire to be special, elevated, applauded, but also the struggle with being ordinary as well. When you know deep inside there's something that you want that needs to shine, that you want to share in that way. So we've got the feeling of ordinariness, also feeling a misfit or feeling unseen. So we've got narcissism as well attached to this, that idea of why. And it's so interesting that with Pluto transit hitting both their charts so powerfully at the moment, they're they're not being recognized for solar principles of being guiding lights or being heroes. They're being recognized in a Pluto way for the most difficult aspects of their lives, the pain, the shame, the things that have been dormant. And his transformation in life with that Scorpio midheaven and the planets on the ascendant have been about how do I get to a place where that's okay to share, even if it leaves him very vulnerable. But in the same moment, he's allowed her to be exposed in a way that she hasn't invited on a mass public level as well.
That's right, and that privacy issue. I think wherever you get Pluto, you get privacy issues, because every time it goes into a sign, something about that sign fundamentally is exposed. It's exposed, it's purged, it's brought out. So the antidote to Pluto is to have a private life, because in your private life you are most yourself. And so therefore private life is often associated with the sex life. Well, what you do in the bedroom with another person is up to you. Now that's the problem with this expose of pornography and everything and every minute detail of complexity. Richard will now that's out. Does he have a private life? Does everybody know the intricate details of all of his angst and his difficulties and his woundedness of his masculinity? And if exposing it like that, it's difficult not to bring it back in. This is what stars have a problem with. That they don't have any private life. They're always recognized. They're always being talked about. They are now owned by society. And ultimately that ruins the individual signs, from Aries through to Virgo. Do you see what I mean?
And with Pluto, there's a power that comes with celebrity, but there's also a loss of power that comes through a loss of anonymity. I think that's what you're saying. And also the fact that when you become well known, the press can exalt you and persecute you at the same time, both those extremes of Pluto. A couple of things I want to mention before I hand over to Stefanie for the final few words. I'm a fan of looking up the personally named asteroids. And the asteroid Martha, which of course is the character in it, is at 13 degrees Capricorn. So it's bang on his Saturn.
Wow.
I like that very much. Looking at those, you can do that.
Yes, you like those asteroids.
Yeah. I mean, they're just a bit of fun, but they're also reminders of how we link to names without realizing it. You can find those on astro.com, of course. And final one is that she's born a few days before J.K. Rowling. And if there's been one woman in the public over the last year or two that has been persecuted for, some will say it's for her particular defense of women. Others will say it's her persecution of trans rights and trans people. However you see it, it's very interesting that they're both Leos with Aquarius rising, and they're obviously plugging into the zeitgeist at the moment as well. Stefanie, do you want to say last few words on anything?
You literally took the words out of my mouth by saying plugging into the zeitgeist, because that's exactly what I feel like this show has done. And I think that if anything can be taken away from the loss of privacy, it's that, this show has given people permission to actually explore some of the ideas and, accept that sometimes relationships are going to be more complex and sometimes people behave in ways that are shocking or weird and uncomfortable and awkward, but actually that doesn't take away from the element of compassion you can still have towards somebody who's just having a difficult time or a very complex individual. And that I thought, if anything, he can sort of take that away and say, I'm giving you a permission slip to, embrace your shame. Don't be ashamed of the fact you're being human and doing something that, just because it doesn't, necessarily, fit in with social norms, you don't have to have this inward spiral of, I don't know, that this kind of negative inner vortex of shame, because I just think sometimes shame is only shame if you allow it to be. You don't have to react in the way that people expect you to over some of the experiences you have that maybe challenge what society wants you to experience, or what it challenges those societal norms. And the other thing I was going to say was that they named a couple of dates in the show where she was stalking his parents, and around that time Pluto was actually on his Saturn as well, round about that point. And obviously on asteroid Martha too. So I just thought that was interesting, as you highlighted that that's where Pluto was at that time, seeing as this has been a very Plutonic conversation. But yeah, it was really, really interesting show, and it's really great to see the actual timed charts, because I didn't even have anything for Fiona Martha. I just had something for Richard, and it was a noon chart. So it was just great to actually see the truth.
Well, her name isn't exactly the name that she gives, and the spelling and everything. So it took a bit of detective work to get it. Richard, do you want to end with anything yourself at all that you feel you haven't added yet?
No, just that these are the way these oppositions were. One, the first six signs are personal, and the second six signs are collective. So what was individual, what was unique, has now become fed into the collective network, where people who have those kind of fantasies or whatever's gone on in this show, it makes it's not so abstract anymore. Other individuals like me have this, so that there's the exposure of a personal individual, right? But the problem is that in doing that, you may drain the individual private life. It's a private life where we're most individual, where you are less exposed, where you talk to only private individuals, which is the I know Leo wants to be seen, but it wants to be seen for itself. not for it. It wants to be seen for its uniqueness. And so once it's out there and you find a group of people that you're not so unique with, you see, then you might lose yourself when you lose your individual story. Anyway, I just wanted to say that's these things feed in and out of these opposition signs, certain themes that we've very clearly seen in this. Looks like I'm going to have to go and view it now.
Yes, indeed. And
Definitely.
yes, so the Pluto transit over her ascendant, opposite her sun soon, but opposite his moon right now as well. As you say, it's been a loss of the individual creative self, or at least a promotion of some form of it as well. So it's an interesting, obviously a very difficult time. He's off in America at the moment promoting it with Jessica, his co-star, and I don't think he's answering questions about any of the legal ramifications or things that are being developed at this stage. But anyway, I hope people at home have enjoyed this. Thank you very much for tuning into this. We're the Astrology Squad, and feel very welcome to put some comments as well, and give us your opinion of the charts. And thank you once again, Richard Swatton and Stefanie James. Thank you very much for your help and your support and your expertise. Thank you both.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Frank. See you.